At a concert of 80,000 people, Freddie Mercury suddenly stopped singing. The person he spotted in the crowd would change his life forever. Because when that homeless man's true identity was revealed, the entire music world started talking about this story. Picture this: Wembley Stadium, July 15, 1986. Queen is in the middle of their biggest European tour, and 80,000 screaming fans are losing their minds as Freddie Mercury commands the stage like the rock god he was born to be. The energy is electric, the crowd is deafening, and everything is going exactly as planned. But sometimes, the most powerful moments in music history happen when everything goes completely off script. Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure to smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell, because what you're about to witness will restore your faith in humanity and show you why Freddie Mercury wasn't just a legendary performer, but a man with the biggest heart in rock and roll. Tonight, we're revealing the untold story of the London miracle that had grown men crying and changed how an entire generation understood the power of compassion. This isn't just about stopping a song. This is about the moment when a rock legend proved that sometimes the most important person in the room is the one everyone else ignores. The evening had started like any other Queen concert. Freddie strutted onto the stage in his iconic white suit. The crowd erupted, and for the first hour, everything was textbook perfection. They'd powered through their biggest hits. The audience was singing every word, and the band was locked in that magical zone where everything just flows. It was during their acoustic segment, when the arena had settled into a more intimate atmosphere, that something extraordinary happened. As Freddie sat at his piano, preparing to perform one of their more emotional ballads, his eyes began scanning the crowd, as he always did, making that personal connection that had made him legendary. That's when he saw him. About 15 rows back, slightly to the left of center stage, sat a man who looked completely out of place among the well-dressed concertgoers. His clothes were worn and dirty, his hair unkempt, and even from the stage, Freddie could see that this wasn't someone who typically had the money for a Queen concert ticket, let alone a seat this close to the stage. The man's name was David Chen, though Freddie wouldn't learn that until much later. What Freddie could see, even from dozens of yards away, was that David was crying, not the emotional tears of a moved fan, but something deeper, more desperate, the tears of someone who was carrying pain that went far beyond music. Security guard Michael Stevens, who was working the front section that night, later recalled noticing the unusual concertgoer. He stood out immediately. Stevens remembered, everyone around him was dressed nicely, excited, typical Queen fans, but this guy looked like he hadn't slept in days. I was keeping an eye on him, wondering how he'd gotten such a good seat. What Michael didn't know, and what nobody in that arena could have guessed, was David Chen's story. 3 months earlier, David had been a successful architect, living in downtown London with his wife Sarah and their 8-year-old daughter Emma. He had a thriving practice, a beautiful home, and what seemed like a perfect life. Then, in the span of 2 weeks, everything fell apart. A major client defaulted on a massive project, leaving David's firm bankrupt. The stress destroyed his marriage, and Sarah took Emma and moved back to her mother's house in Scotland. Within a month, David had lost his business, his family, his home, and his sense of purpose. He'd been living on the streets of London for over 2 months, sleeping in doorways and eating at soup kitchens. But here's where the story gets remarkable. The ticket to this Queen concert wasn't something David had bought. It had belonged to his daughter Emma. Emma Chen had been the biggest Queen fan an 8-year-old could possibly be. She knew every song, every lyric, and had been counting down the days to this concert for months. The tickets had been an early birthday present from David, purchased back when he still had money, back when life made sense. When Sarah had taken Emma to Scotland, she'd left the concert tickets behind, along with most of Emma's Queen memorabilia. David had found them while packing his few remaining belongings before losing the house. Instead of selling them for money he desperately needed, he'd kept them, carrying them in his jacket pocket like a talisman of his former life. On the night of the concert, David had sat outside Wembley Stadium for hours, just holding the tickets and thinking about his daughter. He'd planned to sell them to scalpers, knowing the money could keep him fed for weeks. But as showtime approached, something inside him broke. This was supposed to be Emma's night. This was supposed to be their night together, a father and daughter sharing music they both loved. Instead, she was hundreds of miles away, probably not even thinking about the concert he'd promised her months ago. So David had done something something that made no logical sense. For a homeless man with no money, he'd used one of the tickets himself, not both. He'd sold one to a scalper for enough money to eat for a few days, but he'd kept the other, Emma's ticket, and walked into Wembley Stadium, carrying all his worldly possessions in a backpack. Dr. Patricia Williams, a psychologist who happened to be attending the concert, later analyzed David's emotional state that evening. What we witnessed was someone in profound grief, she explained, not just for his losses, but for all the moments he would never have with his daughter. The concert represented everything he'd failed to provide for her. Sitting in that seat, surrounded by happy families and excited fans, David felt more alone than he ever had in his life. The music that was bringing joy to 80,000 other people only reminded him of what he'd lost, which is why, as Freddie began to sing, David couldn't stop crying. And that's when Freddie Mercury, from his position at the piano, locked eyes with this broken man in the crowd. What happened next would become one of the most talked about moments in Queen's history. Instead of continuing with the planned song, Freddie stopped playing. The silence that followed was immediate and noticeable. 80,000 people suddenly wondering why their hero had paused mid-performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Freddie announced, his voice carrying that familiar theatrical authority, "I need everyone to be very quiet for a moment." The crowd complied immediately, creating an almost eerie silence in the massive stadium. Freddie stood from his piano bench and walked to the edge of the stage, his eyes never leaving David Chen. "There's someone in our audience tonight who needs our help," Freddie continued, pointing in David's general direction. "Someone who's carrying a pain that's too heavy for one person to bear alone." Security personnel throughout the venue began looking around, trying to identify who Freddie was referring to. But Freddie's gaze was laser-focused on David, who had frozen in shock at suddenly being the center of attention for 80,000 people. "Music," Freddie said, his voice softer now, but still carrying clearly through the arena's sound system, "is supposed to heal. It's supposed to bring people together, to remind us that we're never truly alone, no matter how dark things might seem." Ryan May, watching from his position on stage, later recalled being confused, but trusting Freddie's instincts completely. "I had no idea what was happening," May remembered, "but I could see in Freddie's eyes that something profound was occurring. He had that look he got when he was about to do something that would surprise all of us." What Freddie did next defied every convention of rock concert protocol. He called for the house lights to be raised, illuminating the entire audience, and began walking through the crowd toward David Chen. Security scrambled to create a path for him, but Freddie moved with purpose, greeting fans along the way, but never losing sight of his destination. The crowd watched in amazement as their hero left the stage entirely and made his way into the audience. When Freddie finally reached David's row, the homeless man was trembling. He'd gone from being invisible on the streets of London to being the focus of one of the world's biggest rock stars in front of tens of thousands of people. "What's your name, my friend?" Freddie asked gently, kneeling beside David's seat so they could speak at eye level. "David," came the whispered reply, barely audible even to those sitting nearby. "David," Freddie repeated, loud enough for his wireless microphone to pick up. "Tell me, what brings you here tonight?" It was a simple question, but for David Chen, it opened floodgates that had been building for months. Through tears and broken sentences, he began telling Freddie about Emma, about the concert that was supposed to be theirs, about the ticket he'd kept when he should have sold it for food money. The entire stadium listened in rapt attention as this broken man poured out his heart to a rock star who had somehow seen his pain from hundreds of feet away. Freddie listened without interruption, occasionally nodding or placing a reassuring hand on David's shoulder. "So you're here for your daughter," Freddie said when David had finished his story. "You're here because a father's love doesn't disappear just because life falls apart." The crowd's response was immediate and overwhelming. Spontaneous applause erupted throughout the venue, not the wild cheering typical of rock concerts, but respectful, supportive appreciation for what they were witnessing. But Freddie wasn't finished. "David," he said, standing and helping the homeless man to his feet, "I want you to come with me. I want you to help me finish this concert, because tonight isn't just about Queen. Tonight is about families, about love that endures even when everything else falls apart." What followed was unprecedented in concert history. Freddie Mercury, one of the most famous performers in the world, walked back to the stage with a homeless man beside him, while 80,000 people cheered them both. Once on stage, Freddie made an announcement that would create one of the most emotional moments ever captured at a live performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," he declared, "I want you to meet my friend David. He's here tonight for his daughter Emma, who couldn't be with us. But I think Emma would want her father to know that love travels further than distance, and music connects hearts across any separation." The song Freddie chose for their duet was perfect. "Love of My Life," one of Queen's most emotionally powerful ballads. But he adapted it on the spot, turning it into a message from a father to his distant daughter. "David," Freddie said softly, handing him a microphone, "sing this with me. Sing it for Emma, so she knows that wherever she is, her father loves her." What happened next was pure magic. David's voice, rough from months of living rough, joined with Freddie's trained vocals in a performance that transcended technical perfection and entered the realm of pure emotion. The crowd sang along, creating a massive chorus of support for one man's expression of parental love. Video footage from that evening, later bootlegged and shared around the world, shows something remarkable. As David sang, his posture changed. His shoulders straightened, his voice grew stronger, and for those few minutes, he wasn't a homeless man on stage with a rock star. He was a father sharing his love for his daughter, with 80,000 witnesses. The song ended to the longest standing ovation in Queen's concert history. But the story was far from over. As the applause finally died down, Freddie made one more gesture that would cement this moment in rock history. He removed his own jacket, a beautiful custom-made piece worth thousands of pounds, and placed it around David's shoulders. "David," he said, speaking directly to the man but loud enough for everyone to hear, "I want you to keep this, and every time you look at it, I want you to remember that you're not alone, that your love for Emma is the most beautiful music any of us will ever hear, and that tomorrow can be different than today." The crowd erupted again, but this time, David was ready for it. He waved to the audience, tears still streaming down his face, but now they were tears of gratitude rather than despair. What happened after the concert was equally remarkable. As word of the evening's events spread, offers of help began pouring in for David Chen. Fans who had witnessed the performance reached out through local media, offering job opportunities, temporary housing, and support. A construction company owner who had been at the concert hired David within a week. A family therapy organization helped him reconnect with his daughter Emma and begin rebuilding his relationship with his ex-wife Sarah. But perhaps most importantly, David himself had been fundamentally changed by the experience. In interviews years later, he would say that Freddie's compassion had reminded him that he was still a human being worthy of love and respect, even at his lowest point. "Freddie saw me when I was invisible," David reflected in a 2019 interview on the anniversary of the concert. "Not just physically saw me in the crowd, but really saw me, my pain, my love for my daughter, my humanity. That night saved my life." Emma Chen, now an adult with children of her own, keeps a framed photo from that concert in her home. It shows her father on stage with Freddie Mercury, both of them smiling through tears as they sing together. "I was angry at my dad for a long time," Emma admitted in the same interview. "I didn't understand why our family fell apart, why he couldn't keep us together. But watching that footage years later, I realized he never stopped being my father, even when he'd lost everything else. That concert was his way of holding on to our connection." The jacket Freddie gave David that night became a treasured family heirloom. David kept it for the rest of his life, and when he passed away in 2018, Emma inherited it. She had it professionally preserved and occasionally loans it to Queen exhibitions, where it's displayed alongside a placard telling the story of the night Freddie Mercury stopped a concert to help a homeless father connect with his distant daughter. The impact of that evening extended far beyond David Chen's personal story. Videos of the concert spread through early internet communities, inspiring countless acts of kindness from Queen fans around the world. The band received thousands of letters from people sharing their own stories of loss and recovery, many crediting that single moment of compassion with giving them hope during their darkest times. Dr. Patricia Williams, the psychologist who witnessed the event, later wrote a paper on the therapeutic power of public compassion. "What Freddie accomplished that night was remarkable from a clinical standpoint," she explained. "He demonstrated that healing can happen in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the most powerful therapy is simply being seen and acknowledged by another human being." Queen's management initially worried that Freddie's impromptu detour had disrupted the professional flow of the concert, but reviews from that evening universally praised it as one of the most moving performances the band had ever given. Critics noted that that the emotional authenticity of the David Chen moment had elevated the entire show to something transcendent. Freddie himself was deeply affected by the encounter. Band members reported that he talked about David for weeks afterward, and that the experience influenced his approach to connecting with audiences for the rest of his career. Freddie always cared about individual people, Brian May reflected years later, but that night with David taught him something new about the responsibility that comes with having a platform. He realized that his voice could do more than entertain, it could heal. The story became part of Queen's unofficial history, passed down through fan communities and shared at tribute concerts. When the band was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Brian May mentioned the David Chen concert in his acceptance speech, calling it an example of how music can create moments of grace that transcend entertainment. Perhaps most remarkably, the incident inspired other performers to be more aware of individual audience members who might need connection or support. Several major artists have since stopped concerts to acknowledge fans going through difficult times, citing Freddie's example as inspiration. The homeless shelter, where David had been staying before the concert, reported a surge in donations and volunteer applications in the weeks following the show. Local newspapers picked up the story, leading to increased awareness of homelessness issues in London and inspiring new programs to help people rebuild their lives. Today, there's a small plaque outside Wembley Stadium commemorating the events of July 15, 1986. It reads simply, "Music connects hearts across any distance. In memory of the night compassion stopped the show." David Chen rebuilt his life slowly but steadily. He eventually started his own small construction business, remarried, and maintained a close relationship with Emma throughout her teenage years and into adulthood. He credited that single moment on stage with Freddie Mercury as the turning point that reminded him he was worth saving. Emma Chen Morrison, now a music teacher herself, often tells her students about the night her father sang with Freddie Mercury. She uses the story to teach them that music isn't just about notes and rhythms. It's about human connection, compassion, and the power of being truly seen by another person. The bootleg recording of that concert remains one of the most treasured items in Queen's unofficial discography. Fans who want to experience the full emotional impact of that evening seek out the complete footage, which captures not just the musical performance, but the profound human moment that occurred when a rock legend chose compassion over protocol. If this story moved you the way it moved those 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium, please hit that like button and share it with anyone who needs to be reminded that we're all just one act of kindness away from having our lives completely changed. What's the most powerful act of compassion you've ever witnessed? Share your story in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more incredible tales of how music can bridge any gap between human hearts. The magic of seeing and being seen continues here on our channel, where every story reminds us that behind every face in every crowd is a human being deserving of love, respect, and the chance to be heard.